The frigid mountain air biting into bare flesh was the very first sensation that breached the void of unconsciousness. Sudden, blinding agony flared violently across the neck, as if a heated iron brand had been pressed deep into the flesh. A desperate attempt to breathe yielded only a horrific, wet, bubbling sound from a completely severed windpipe. Upon rolling to the side, the world tilted catastrophically as his own head rolled away from the rest of his body. The headless torso lay entirely limp on the blood-stained snow, its gray clerical tunic torn open at the collar. Instead of a cold descent into death, vibrant green threads of necromantic energy began sprouting from the open wound. The glowing green filaments extended outward like living roots, anchoring themselves firmly into the frozen dirt. Driven by a strange, autonomous instinct, the disembodied head glared fiercely at its detached physical form. With a sudden jerk, the magical green stitches pulled the head sliding backward across the jagged, ice-covered rocks. The two severed pieces of flesh slammed together with a sickening, wet crunch that echoed through the silence. Thousands of microscopic green threads began rapidly sewing the skin, muscle, and bone back into alignment. A sudden massive intake of icy air rushed down his newly restored throat as his lungs expanded completely. Father Marac carefully ran his trembling fingers over the rough, newly formed scar wrapping around his entire neck. The memory of playing a dark fantasy RPG until dawn flashed vividly behind his eyes, confirming his current location. He had somehow been thrust directly into the body of the very character he created, the widely reviled cleric of Decay. A strange, heavy thumping weight shifted restlessly beneath the fabric of his tunic, right over his heart. With a swift, sharp tug, Marac ripped open the front of his gray robe to inspect his bare chest. An extra human-like hand was embedded into his flesh, its pale fingers undulating like an independent parasite. This was the Holy Hand, a legendary artifact bound to the unique class of the sole disciple of Decay. Attempting to test his physical state, Marac picked up a small, frozen stone and placed it into his mouth. He chewed slowly, but there was absolutely no sensation of flavor, confirming the complete loss of his taste. To his surprise, his physical strength felt immense, far surpassing anything a regular human could ever possess. The sound of crunching snow nearby caused Marac to immediately freeze and press his back against a boulder. A group of low-ranking mountain bandits emerged from the heavy mist, carrying rusted iron axes. The lead bandit pointed a dirty blade forward, his eyes locked instantly onto Marac's gray priest outfit. Marac stood up slowly from the shadows, showing no fear as the cold mountain wind whipped his robes. Suddenly, the holy hand on his chest began to twitch violently, pointing its index finger directly at the bandits. A spectral, glowing text interface appeared in his vision, ranking the approaching bandits as low-tier souls. Infuriated by his calm demeanor, the primary bandit charged forward, swinging his rusted axe in a wild arc. The heavy iron blade sliced clean through Marac's left arm, severing it completely at the elbow joint. The bandits laughed triumphantly, assuming the strange young priest would now fall to his knees and beg. Instead, Marac merely looked down at his bleeding stump with a look of pure, unbothered calculation. Thick, glowing green threads erupted instantly from the stump, reaching out like a web toward the fallen limb. The severed arm was violently pulled back and stitched to his body within a single horrifying second. Marac flexed his newly reattached fingers, the glowing green energy fading back beneath his pale skin. The bandits stumbled backward in sheer terror, their faces turning completely white at the unnatural display. Seizing the moment, Marac stepped forward with superhuman speed, his glowing green eyes locking onto the leader. With a single powerful strike enhanced by his decay magic, he shattered the leader's chestplate entirely. The remaining bandits fled screaming into the dense fog, leaving their dying leader gasping on the ice. Marac stood over the fallen foe, watching as the holy hand on his chest began absorbing a faint essence. A sudden loud chime resonated directly in his mind, announcing that his first divine task had officially begun. To reclaim his human senses and survive this world, he would need to locate 12 sacred relics scattered across kingdoms. Every religious faction and holy knight order in this land would hunt a priest of decay without mercy. Turning away from the blood-stained mountain trail, he began his long, icy descent towards civilization below. Just as he reached the tree line, an ominous, massive horn echoed from the valleys, signaling a massive search party approaching his position. The reverberating blast of the war horn shattered the quiet of the snowy forest, forcing Marac to duck beneath a heavy pine branch. He sprinted through the deep drifts, his newly stitched neck tingling with a cold, unnatural magic as he fled the approaching search party. The parasitic holy hand on his chest writhed restlessly under his robes, pulsing against his skin like a second frantic heartbeat. After hours of navigating the treacherous mountain passes, the distant flickering torches of a frontier town finally appeared on the horizon. Marac pulled his hood down low to obscure his pale features and the faint residual green seams running across his throat. He slipped past the distracted gate guards, blending seamlessly into the nightly crowd of weary merchants and rugged travelers. The bustling streets smelled of roasted meat and wet wool, yet his deadened tongue reminded him bitterly of his lost sense of taste. He needed money and a legitimate identity to survive in this unforgiving world, making the local adventurer guild his primary destination. Pushing open the heavy oak doors, he was instantly greeted by a wave of heat, the roar of laughter, and the clinking of ale mugs. Marac scanned the room, noting the distinct power levels and equipment of the various mercenary factions scattered across the hall. He walked directly toward the long wooden counter, where a sharp-eyed receptionist was sorting through thick stacks of parchment. Stepping up to the desk, Marac requested a new registration form in a low, resonant voice that carried an eerie, calm authority. The female receptionist blinked in confusion, sensing an inexplicable, chilling pressure radiating from the unassuming priest in front of her. She handed over a blank, heavy parchment sheet along with a silver needle meant for the traditional blood authentication ritual. Marac took the needle, pricking the tip of his index finger without flinching as a dark drop of blood welled up instantly. As his blood pressed against the magical parchment, the paper did not glow with a standard blue light, but instead turned a bruised, obsidian black. The receptionist gasped audibly, staring at the anomalous, corrupted color that defied all established guild standards. Suddenly, a heavy, iron-gloved hand slammed down on the opposite end of the counter, disrupting the tense silence. A tall, muscular mercenary with a mane of bright blonde hair and a sneering expression stepped into Marac's personal space. Behind him, 3 other blonde mercenaries wearing matching gilded armor burst into loud, mocking laughter. The leader demanded to know what a pathetic, fragile priest was doing, trying to register for dangerous monster hunts. Marac remained perfectly still, his hands resting quietly within his tattered sleeves as he ignored the blatant provocation. Annoyed by the complete lack of a reaction, the blonde mercenary reached out violently to grab Marac by his frayed collar. Instantly, the parasitic holy hand on Marac's chest throbbed violently, unleashing a sudden wave of dark magical energy. A semi-translucent obsidian barrier solidified in the air, deflecting the heavy metal gauntlet with a loud metallic clang. The sheer kinetic backlash of the dark shield rippled through the mercenary's arm, forcing him back several steps in agony. The entire guild hall fell into a dead, suffocating silence as every single adventurer stared at the hovering dark magical barrier. The remaining blonde mercenaries drew their longswords, the sharp ring of steel cutting through the quiet room. From beneath his dark hood, Marac's eyes flared with a brilliant, predatory green light that promised absolute decay. The dark barrier expanded outward like an opening fan, pulsing with heavy waves of gravity that cracked the wooden floorboards. The receptionist scrambled backward into her chair, terrified by the sheer magnitude of the unholy power manifesting at her desk. The blonde mercenaries froze in place, their bravado completely evaporating as they felt the dense, suffocating pressure of a decay aura. Marac stepped forward slowly, each footprint leaving a faint, frost-like pattern of black rot on the floor. The mercenary leader backed away, his heavy armor clanking loudly against a nearby table as he realized he had crossed a monster. With a slight wave of his hand, Marac dissipated the dark barrier into thin air, leaving only the smell of ozone and old dust. He turned back to the trembling receptionist and calmly requested his completed adventurer registration token. With shaking hands, she stamped the blackened parchment and handed him a heavy, obsidian-colored iron identification badge. Marac took the heavy token, slipping it into the folds of his gray priest tunic with a sense of quiet accomplishment. He turned and walked out of the stunned guild hall, the crowd parting before him like the sea as they watched him leave. Just as his boot stepped out into the freezing night air, the parasitic hand on his chest twisted sharply, pointing a single rigid finger toward the highest tower of the distant royal palace. The rigid, undulating finger of the parasitic hand dug deep into Marac's ribs as it pointed directly at the towering silhouette of the royal citadel. He pulled his heavy, tattered gray priest's tunic tightly over his chest to conceal the grotesque, writhing movement of his unholy appendage. The icy wind howled through the narrow alleyways, carrying with it the faint, putrid stench of sulfur and decaying flesh from the outskirts. Rather than heading directly toward the palace, Marac retraced his steps toward the guild hall to secure the resources required for his journey. The heavy oak doors of the Adventurers Guild burst open, revealing a chaotic scene of hurried mercenaries and panicked officials. A grand bell began to toll from the central plaza, signaling an emergency vanguard assembly that immediately silenced the tavern's chatter. Standing atop the guild's central staircase was a high-tier mage clad in embroidered violet robes, looking down at the crowd with undisguised contempt. "The eastern catacombs have breached, and I will not have low-born Sellswords compromising my investigation," the mage declared coldly. Marac quietly pushed through the murmuring crowd, his green eyes fixed on the magical map unfolding on the main reception desk. The blonde mercenaries from earlier stepped back nervously, remembering the impenetrable dark magical barrier he had manifested just hours before. The haughty mage, noticing Marac's unbothered approach, slammed his staff down and demanded to know who allowed a mere cleric to step forward. Without uttering a single word, Marac placed his newly minted guild token onto the smooth counter, the iron clicking sharply against the wood. Suddenly, the parasitic hand beneath his vest twitched violently as a massive surge of malevolent energy rippled through the floorboards from below. Screams echoed from the lower levels as mutated, crimson-eyed demonic hounds burst through the floorboards, tearing into the rear guard. The haughty mage attempted to chant a defensive spell, but his complex incantation stumbled under the sheer pressure of the demonic aura. Moving with superhuman speed born of his dark reincarnation, Marac lunged forward, drawing a concealed ritual dagger from his belt. A demonic hound lunged at his throat, its jaws snapping shut and completely severing Marac's left arm in a horrific explosion of blood. The onlookers gasped in horror, expecting the young priest to collapse from shock, but Marac didn't even blink as he grabbed his own severed arm. Bright, glowing green necromantic stitches erupted from his shoulder socket, instantly weaving the flesh and bone back together with a wet clicking sound. With his arm instantly restored, Marac channeled the decaying essence of his goddess, causing a wave of corrosive green mist to erupt from his palm. The demonic hounds shrieked as the decaying mist dissolved their flesh to bone within seconds, turning them into puddles of steaming black sludge. Marac stood amidst the melting carcasses, his breathing steady, completely unfazed by the gruesome display of his unholy immortality. A heavy silence fell over the entire room as veteran warriors stared at the priest who had just regenerated an entire limb and annihilated a demon pack single-handedly. The guild administrator stepped forward from behind the reinforced iron counter, clapping his hands slowly with a mix of fear and deep respect. "By the authority vested in this branch, I hereby bestow upon you the title of Demon Slayer, Father Marac," the administrator announced loudly. The haughty violet-robed mage scoffed and turned his head away, his pride thoroughly shattered by the effortless performance of a low-ranking priest. However, the promotion did not come without strings, as the administrator immediately handed Marac a black parchment sealed with royal wax. "The crown has ordered an elite expedition into the Sunken Valley, and your unique talents are no longer optional," the administrator whispered. Marac opened the letter, his analytical mind recognizing the political trap designed to either eliminate him or bind him to the royal court. As he read, the parasitic hand on his chest shifted again, its fingers drumming against his skin in a rhythmic pattern that indicated a high concentration of divine souls ahead. Realizing this elite expedition would lead him directly to the sacred relics needed to restore his mortal senses, Marac accepted the terms. The dawn broke across the frozen landscape the following morning, casting long, pale shadows as the elite expeditionary force assembled at the city gates. To his displeasure, the haughty violet mage was also present, mounted on a heavily armored steed and flanked by royal bodyguards. Political tension hung heavy in the air as various noble factions eyed Marac, the mysterious undead priest who answered to no lord. Marac ignored the staring eyes, his boots crunching methodically through the thick layer of fresh snow as he took his place at the rear of the convoy. The heavy caravan iron wheels ground against the frozen mud, beginning their long descent into the uncharted territory where demonic unrest was spreading. As the city vanished behind the jagged peaks, the air grew thick with the unmistakable scent of stagnant mana and burnt brimstone. Marac closed his eyes, using his internal status screen from his past gaming life to map out the hidden threats looming in the cliffs above. Suddenly, the entire canyon echoed with a deafening screech as thousands of gargoyle-like creatures swarmed down from the mountaintops, blocking their path of retreat. Amidst the panic, the parasitic hand on Marac's chest violently tore through his tunic, pointing directly into the center of the monster swarm, where a terrifyingly divine golden light began to crack open the sky. The blinding golden light expanded violently across the fractured sky, threatening to incinerate anyone who dared look directly into its celestial core. Below the rift, the Royal Expedition forces shrieked in terror as their skin began to blister under the intense, oppressive heat of the descending divine presence. Marac watched as the parasitic holy hand on his chest throbbed with a frenzied, erratic pulse, its many fingers twitching wildly toward the clouds. High above the battlefield, the clouds parted completely to reveal the vanguard of the Annihilation Crusade, an army of terrifying, faceless, descended angels. Realizing that the kingdom's elite substitution plot had intentionally lured these monsters here as a sacrifice, Marac gripped his ceremonial dagger with absolute resolve. Suddenly, the arrogant mage from the guild stumbled backward into the snow, her magical barrier shattering into useless, glittering fragments. A deep, booming voice echoed from the central angel, declaring that the Mad King's bloodline had defaulted on their ancestral pact with the heavens. Marac noticed that the 12th and final sacred relic, a pulsating crystalline heart of decay, was currently embedded in the Mad King's crown nearby. Without warning, the descended angels unleashed a torrential rain of golden spears that impaled the surviving mercenaries instantly. One massive spear of light pierced directly through Marac's shoulder, instantly vaporizing his flesh and pinning him to the frozen earth. Instead of dying, Marac let out a low, unsettling laugh as thick, vibrant green necromantic threads erupted from his wound to knit his flesh back together. He stood up effortlessly, shattering the golden spear of light into harmless particles with a single wave of his dark, magical barrier. The parasitic hand on his chest extended outwards, its fingers stretching like long white tendrils toward the fallen king's crown. With a swift, fluid motion, the tendrils snapped the crystalline heart of decay out of the gold crown and pulled it directly into Marac's grasp. The moment his fingers locked around the 12th relic, a tremendous surge of absolute divine authority erupted from the core of his being. The faceless angels paused their assault, their golden auras flickering unsteadily as they sensed a power that rivaled their own creator. Marac could feel his long-lost mortal senses beginning to violently reawaken as the 12 gathered relics fused permanently into his soul. For the first time since his reincarnation, the copper taste of blood and the crisp, cold scent of winter air flooded his tongue and nose. The central angel roared an anthem of absolute destruction, diving straight toward Marac with its 12 wings fully extended like gilded blades. Marac did not flinch. Instead, he simply extended his open hand toward the oncoming celestial executioner. "In the name of the Mother of Decay," Marac whispered, activating the ultimate authority of his completed dark fantasy status. A colossal wave of rot and decay erupted from his palm, instantly turning the falling snow into black, acidic ash. The moment the miasma touched the central angel, its golden wings withered, rotted, and turned to dust in a matter of seconds. The entire angelic vanguard began to fall from the sky like dying stars, their divine armor dissolving into rust and corruption. Marac walked forward through the melting snow, each step leaving a patch of rapidly growing, corrupted black fauna beneath his boots. He approached the dying commander of the Annihilation Crusade, who lay shattered on the frozen ground. The parasitic hand on Marac's chest gently emerged one last time, tapping the angel's chest to read its final fading divinity score. A floating dark green system screen materialized in Marac's vision, confirming that the divinity of the heavens had been completely subjugated. With a final snap of his fingers, the entire sky rift collapsed inward, sealing the gateway to the oppressive heavenly realm forever. Silence returned to the mountain pass as the remaining royal soldiers dropped their weapons, realizing the war was over and they had been saved. The surviving guild mage stepped forward, trembling as she asked Marac if he intended to destroy the kingdom next. Marac looked back at her, his pale green eyes softening as the eerie magical stitches on his neck faded into smooth, normal skin. "I have no interest in ruling a broken world," he stated calmly, his voice carrying the deep resonance of a true deity. The parasitic hand on his chest retreated fully beneath his tunic, flattening out until it became nothing more than a harmless, elegant tattoo. Reaching into his satchel, Marac pulled out a simple piece of dried ration meat and took a slow, deliberate bite. A genuine smile broke across his face as the rich, savory taste of the food fully registered on his restored palate. With his mortality reclaimed and his absolute authority over decay established, nobody in this world would ever dare hunt him again. The dawn broke over the horizon, casting a warm golden light across the land that completely erased the grim shadows of the night. Father Marac, the sole disciple of Decay, had rewritten his severed fate and carved out a future of absolute freedom. His long journey through the dark game world had finally come to a flawless, peaceful end.